This story comes to us from our next door neighbor, and a chilling experience that involved us as well. My wife and I live in a block apartment in Hong Kong. Our neighbor is a single young lady, one of the students at a nearby university. We think she might be a bit of a rich girl because she's rented out her own apartment right next to ours, while most of her peers are living on campus in the dorms. The other day we came home and saw her trying to get into her apartment door. Now she had the key in her hand, but it's like she couldn't bring herself to open the door and go in. Well, we noticed that she looked a little worried, and my wife asked if everything was okay. She paused and told us everything wasn't okay, and as a matter of fact, there was something she needed to talk to us about. She tells us that the night before, so that would be a Friday night, she was actually just happy to get home from school and the end of the school week. She was exhausted. She came home, she said she just wanted to flop out on the bed for a while. But about an hour into relaxing, her friends from the dorm phoned her, and they've got a private karaoke room. They're very excited, and so was she. She said she threw on her makeup and her clothes and as fast as she could got down to the front gate, where she met the girls up and they made their way to the KTV. She says the KTV rooms are very dark, very noisy, and there's a lot of lights, disco lights, strobe lights, and there's a lot of things on the tables as well. Lots of snacks, lots of drinks, and yes, people are drinking. It's a crazy little scene in there. She says it was maybe an hour in before she realized she couldn't find her new iPhone anywhere on the table. She says they kicked on their lights in the room and everybody looked for it. So she had one of her friends use their phone and do the old trick of phoning her number, and they asked everyone to try to be quiet and hopefully they would hear it ringing, probably between some seat cushions or in a dark corner under the table somewhere. Well, her friend dials, they ask everyone to be quiet, and it rings, and they don't hear anything inside that room. And then they're very surprised when somebody picks up the phone, and then a strange reply came back. But on hearing this, her friend suggests it's somebody who is drinking and they can barely talk. This is actually not unusual in these KTV rooms, where everybody will put their phones on a table. Somebody will be drunk in the dark room, and underneath all those strobe lights will stumble out, grab what they think is their phone, and start making their way home before most of the time realizing this isn't their phone at all. But this drunk doesn't seem to be aware of that. Certainly it sounded like a man. Some boyfriends had come and gone, and some staff had come and gone as well. They asked the staff outside if anybody had seen a probably drunk man walking out at any time. No other patrons in the KTV could recall seeing anybody that matched a description like that. Well, a little time passes, and now the girls decide they'll get their friend to phone again, and let's see if they can maybe he's sobered up a little bit. Her friend uses her phone to dial her number again, and lo and behold, he picks up again. Now this time the girls are getting a little annoyed. Hey, hello? You, listen, are you listening? But instead, they get an even more disturbing response. Hey, listen, you've got my friend's phone, and it's not yours, so could you please bring it back here? He ends the call. Well, now the girls are getting upset because what they think is, this is not just a drunk, this is someone who's purposely stolen her phone. She says it sounded like the person was laughing at us, like they were mocking us and sneering and laughing and giggling, maybe proud of themselves that they'd pulled off this heist. and now has a new iPhone in his pocket. All right, well, now the girls are very upset. They talk to security, who could not find anything either. Well, now the neighbor's telling us all this in the hallway the next day, so my wife naturally asks, well, did you phone the police? The neighbor girl explains that by that time, it was getting very late, and they agreed that what they would do is just accept that the phone was gone for now. The girls would break up, take everybody home, and not to worry about it. In the morning, they'd phone the police and see if they could maybe get a GPS tracker. That's one way to locate whoever had this phone. Well, the girls all Ubered home, dropped off our neighbor, who said she came home feeling pretty exhausted and a little defeated. She said she made her way into the apartment and locked the door behind her, dragged herself over to the bed, and that's when she realized her phone was sitting on the nightstand, exactly where she'd put it when she'd come home from school earlier that day. In her rush to go, she'd forgotten her phone. For a split second, she felt a relief. Thank goodness, it's not stolen at all. That's when it struck her. Wait a minute. Then who had been answering her phone the whole night? Well, as she's telling us this, my wife becomes horrified over the whole thing. I said, was somebody hiding in your apartment the whole time? She tells us that when she realized there is no way anyone else should have been in there, she went to the kitchen, grabbed a very large and sharp kitchen knife, holding it close to her. She carefully looked through the entire house. She couldn't find anyone anywhere. She said she even looked in the shower, under the bed, above the closet. But there was no way anyone was in that apartment. Keeping in mind these apartments are rather small, so there's not that many places to hide. And there was no sign that anyone had entered the apartment. My wife made a suggestion. Maybe your friend was phoning the wrong number. But she says they double-checked that many times. She had it programmed into her phone. And indeed, her iPhone showed record of somebody answering it at those times. She tells us that she triple-locked the door, put on the chain lock, and even put a chair in front of the door, just so she could feel satisfied enough to go to bed. And that's when things get very interesting. She tells us that by this time it's getting quite late in early morning, really. She finally gets into bed and relaxes enough that she's starting to nod off. But then she's alerted to the light on her phone turning on, as if somebody had touched the screen. Now, she'd left the kitchen knife under her pillow and slowly reached forward and grabbed it out of fear. What's going on? How is it turning on by itself? And that's when she sees the curtains blowing in and out, as if sweeping over the surface of the phone. For you see, that nightstand is right beside the window. It's worth mentioning now that our apartment building had a series of break-ins in the past, so all of our windows had those security bars bolted to the outside. And that extra security might be one of the reasons people here feel comfortable leaving their windows wide open, especially on these hot summer nights that we'd been having. It seemed that the curtains had been blowing back and forth and sweeping across the surface of her iPhone that had sat on that charger. Well, my wife is relieved. So it was the curtains that were answering it. No, it wasn't. She said that's when she saw the curtains blowing back and forth, and when they went back again, there was a human hand reaching into her room. She says at that point it was all instinct. She gripped the kitchen knife and jabbed it as hard as she could at the curtains. She felt the end of the kitchen knife go through the curtain and hit something soft yet hard. And then she heard that man's voice again. She threw the curtains aside and tried to look out the window, only to see a blur of black hair disappearing down below her window. Maybe a burglar, I said. My wife asked her, "Did you phone the police?" And she said, yes, she did. She phoned the police immediately and told them what had happened. Now, we're on the 5th floor, so I was a little surprised somebody would be able to climb up that high past other windows and not make enough noise banging the security gates outside the windows as well. But she tells us that he didn't have to climb 5 floors. In fact, the police didn't have much trouble finding him either. He wasn't that far away. He was really only a few feet away, below her, on the 4th floor. A strange man who lives down there was found in his apartment cowering with a fresh knife wound in the middle of his forehead. Police took him away. It seems that what he'd been doing was, at nights, waiting for her to come home from school. Maybe she would flop out on her bed every Friday night as usual, as a habit, and he would, as a habit, sneak out his own window, open his security gates, and pull himself up to spy on her through her own bedroom window. The police suppose that he might have already been up there, spying on her when she had the call to go to the KTV. Perhaps when her phone was ringing, he got some kind of perverse thrill from making you guess who was answering the phone.